Happy Valentine's Day, y'all.
Woohoo!
Yeah, we have the perfect episode for this day. Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Truly. Would not have guessed it, but really, this episode taught us a lot.
Oh my God.
We did not see it coming.
Yeah, so in this conversation, we have Dr. Brad Ingram, who is a pediatric epileptologist living with epilepsy. And he just explains like so much of a male perspective about living with epilepsy, which opened our eyes to how little we know about that.
Yeah, had no idea that it was truly a big difference, but it is.
Yeah, which made me be like, God, I'm ignorant. And now I just feel like, it just makes me want to keep getting more and more stories, from male and female perspectives.
Yeah.
So, we also want to point out, I want to point this out. Lexi's like, St. Valentine is the patron saint of epilepsy. So that just means that we have love. I don't know what it means, but it's probably good. We really hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as we did with Dr. Ingram. He's just a stellar dude all around.
He really is. He's fun to talk to, uses adorable little Southern words, and yet another warm person that's just nice
that we've been lucky to chat with.
Yeah.
So as always, please stick around after our conversation to listen to our epilepsy fave of the week. We also really want to thank our sponsors for supporting us, for believing in us, for making this happen. And those sponsors are SK Life Science and Neurelis. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Yes. And we want to thank everyone who's listened and supported us as well. We are so appreciative that you also believe in this. If you want to throw a little monetary support our way, we will not object, but we do not expect anyone to. It's just if you're feeling it. You can find that fundraising link on our website at whatthefpodcast.com. Okay, here we go. Hey guys, welcome to What the F. We are here with Dr. Brad Ingram. He is a pediatric epileptologist. And I said that word correctly, and I'm very proud of myself because I always mess it up. He practices at the University of Mississippi Medical Center, where he is also a professor. Brad, Dr. Ingram, it is so good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to get to talk to you ladies.
Oh, well, you're just such a bright spot. We've been talking about looking forward to this all week. We're like, oh my God, we get to talk to Brad. He's such a bright spot in our lives. So today we kind of wanted to talk about, your perspective, the male perspective of living with epilepsy, because it's just something we don't hear a lot about, probably because, to speak in generalizations, women share more than men do. But really we want to talk about, just what your experience with epilepsy was like, how you got to be an epileptologist. Oh my gosh, I hit it twice in a row. I never do that.
That was good.
And just, it's just your experience. What it's like being a dude with epilepsy.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself. I was diagnosed at 15. So, and I'm 40. I don't even know. Once you hit 40, do you even celebrate birthdays anymore? I don't know.
I love that.
I'm 40 plus. It's all downhill from there. So I've had epilepsy for a while and really had kind of that, unfortunately, very typical teenage experience where once you start seizing, you never go back, right? A lot of very explosive onset seizures as a teen. And I think the nature of a lot of seizure patients, not all seizure patients, of course, but is that a lot of us are very healthy. And then epilepsy seems like, what is this? It's kind of out of the blue. It's so senseless. My experience was there was no explanation at all, right? There's just, now you're this person who has this thing. And at any minute, it's not like you have this warning or like you're going to develop a fever first and then you're going to get sick, or you're going to have the sniffles for 2 days and then you're going to get sick. You're just like, all of a sudden you're going to have a seizure. And so I didn't have any experience at all with healthcare. And I think that, when I'm talking to my teenagers now as a doctor, one of the things that I have become very clear about is girls have this wide range of emotions. And I don't mean to generalize, but I think one of the things that I'm super passionate about is that boys don't talk about this. Men don't talk about this. And I certainly do not want to make blanket statements about genders, because who does that in 2022, right?
Right.
But then, if I can, just now that I said that, like in general, young ladies and women in general are more likely to have friend groups that they can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
They are more likely to enjoy going to the doctor or to just go to the doctor.
I don't know about the enjoy part.
They will be compliant. We'll put it
Yeah,
that way.
we'll suck it up.
Yes, compliant.
They're more likely to even seek a second opinion or go to see a specialist, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are far more likely, as we move into older ages, to think about things like, I need to go to the doctor because I might want to get pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that my epilepsy could be a huge impact on that. Dudes don't care about that, right? And young ladies have this like wide spectrum of emotions that they can touch.
Mm-hmm.
They can be sad, they can be happy, they can be depressed, they can be anxious, they can touch all of these things. And teenage boys, at least the vast majority of teenage boys, can feel all of those things, but the only thing they can express is anger, right? That's the only thing, that's the only emotion they can touch. And so for so many of my patients, and for me, the only emotion that I could touch related to my epilepsy was a lot of anger, a lot of rage, a lot of withdrawing, right? Like that's where that goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at the nature of what epilepsy looks like for men versus women, guys are historically somewhat culturally taught, somewhat maybe a little hardwired, somewhat it's just kind of what a lot of us like. We're supposed to like go out, club something over the head, drag it back to the cave, eat it for dinner, right? That's just
Yeah.
good, bad, or ugly. That's what we're wired to do. And so if you take a disease state that now I can't drive a car, now I can't be alone, now potentially I'm not even allowed to sleep alone now because my mommy's going to be staring at me all night, right? Now, young ladies who previously might have found me visually or psychologically or socially interesting are now afraid of me, afraid to be alone with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Men are very insular, isolated people in general. And now you have this disease that's even more withdrawing and isolating. And it's a very, very challenging thing to develop who you are as a young man, as a young sexual being, as a young person in relationship when you can't drive a car, you can't pick up a girl for a first date. How are you going to get there? Is she going to come pick you up? How, what does that look like? Already you've ceded a lot of the traditional roles to whoever you're going to ask out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's easy if you live in any number of cities that have lots of public transit. But in a lot of America, including where I was growing up, that wasn't a thing, right? And then you flip over to the science side of this sort of thing. And some of this is because of the pregnancy risk. And some of this is because of the nature of how hormones in women affect epilepsy. And by no means am I discouraging any of that very important and very valuable research in women with epilepsy, because the brain does not like estrogen, right? It likes progesterone, okay? And it's all right with testosterone, but it doesn't like estrogen. So we should be doing even more research in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start to look at what epilepsy does to men, that research is just not there. There are whole swaths of people who are devoting their careers to women in epilepsy. There's nobody out there doing their research, devoting their careers to men in epilepsy. We don't know where they're at psychologically. Half of the reason we don't know where they're at psychologically is because they are far less likely, if you look at the sparse little here and there research from Britain in the 90s, right? If you look at what's out there, males are less likely to go past their primary care doctor for care. They're far less likely to be compliant with their medication plans. They're far less likely to go to a neurologist or certainly an epileptologist because, in general, males don't like going to the doctor, right? And once they make a relationship with somebody, that's who they're going to see for the rest of their life. So it's a challenging disorder.
So then why is it that the research is lacking for males in epilepsy? Is it because of those reasons you just said, where so you're like less likely to get participants too? Or is it like a lack of both sides needing to try harder?
I think a lot of it is pregnancy, right? And that is a really criminal part of this disorder, right? Is the concept of it's hard enough to be a woman who has seizures and have to deal with these terrible medicines and all of the side effects that come with them, right? That's bad enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or have a seizure every period.
Or have a seizure every
period,
right?
We go. Yeah.
Right, here we go. And then to know that getting pregnant may bring so much joy, but the potential risk for A, am I going to potentially pass these seizures on to my baby? B, is my pregnancy maybe or maybe not going to make my seizures much, much worse? And then C, am I well controlled, but the pregnancy is going to get my plasma levels, whatever those are, right, way off. And now I'm having a significant increase because of the pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
And then that's to say nothing of the potential. What is this medicine potentially that kept me from seizing during the pregnancy? But what is that going to do to my baby, right? So these are all of huge
it's
import.
Funny you bring all those things up because we had another doctor on this season, Dr. King. She's an epileptologist. That's 3 times, guys. I got it. she's an epileptologist who specializes in women's health and specifically focusing on women's fertility. And she talked, it's just such a delicate balance of.
It's so delicate.
Oh, it's something that I think you're right that we as women are faced with, like, you hit 35 and you're like, oh God, if I haven't had kids, that your internal clock is ticking. But then if you have epilepsy add on top of that, you're right. There's just so many things to think about and to be more driving force to be proactive, I suppose.
And then I think too, you've got that once a month time clock for a lot of patients. And so that's an easy problem to tackle. But I do think, we were at the Epilepsy Foundation meeting in Nashville, and we had a panel discussion there for men. And I went.
You spoke at that, right?
I spoke at it, and I was one of 3 panelists, and it was gorgeous. It was an amazing experience. And I went, and my wife and I went together to have this amazing wife, Maggie, and she's like part wife, part like muse, part parole officer, right? So like at any given time, she never knows what role she's going to be filling. And I told her on the way to Nashville, I was like, so I'm doing 2 panels, one on autonomous driving, so vehicles that drive themselves. That one will be packed to the gills. And then I'm doing this one on men. And she goes, what does that mean? And I was like, well, I don't really know. There's not really I don't know. I'm not prepared for it at all. We'll see, right? And we had met and we kind of had this discussion, but I fully expected maybe we go in that room and there's 5 people there and maybe they're all moms of boys, I have no idea.
Right.
And when we go in the room and it is full of guys. Wow. And the reason why I didn't know what to expect was I've had epilepsy knocking on almost 30 years now, right? And I have been an epileptologist for almost half of that time. And I have never been in professional or personal, I have never been in a group setting that was devoted towards discussing issues related to men and epilepsy ever.
Wow.
And first of all, we went over by like 30 minutes. They could not get us out of that room. I mean, it was like the question answer. We talked for like 10 minutes and then it was just like all skate open room.
Oh, I love that.
I think the concept of like the men with epilepsy out there are struggling. We're really struggling. We do not understand, even no matter what kind of a person you are, because this term is loaded. I know toxic masculinity, I get it, but we do not understand how to be the like alpha man. I'm going to make a career for myself. I'm going to accomplish things for myself. I'm going to set these goals for myself and achieve them. These things that like we think we're supposed to do as men. We don't know how to do that sometimes with our epilepsy. And a lot of times that's because of the epilepsy. A lot of the times that's because of our medications and the side effects they're in. And a lot of times that's because we have this doctor that's telling us that we can't. Right. And then sometimes it's because we can't drive or get there in the first place. And then sometimes it's because, some of the room was people standing up saying, look, I never seize. I'm not uncontrolled. I can drive a car, but I really want to join the Army and I can't join the Army. Right. And these guys stand up and they're like, blah, 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 blah. They have no necks. They're made for the Army. Right. And I would trust them in a heartbeat, but they can't because it's just they have a history of epilepsy. So there's like all these things. It's like, no, 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 all these barriers that have been put up.
Do you think men with epilepsy are forced to kind of, just when all those things you're saying, like things that men feel like is fulfilling, where it's like, having a job, being that person, being the quote unquote man. But so like that men with epilepsy are kind of forced into recalibrating their own like societal values to fit themselves, so that like maybe realizing that like those things don't define my self-worth in order to move forward? Or do you think that it's just kind of like a rock meets hard place?
I think the challenge is, I recommend that all of my teenagers, boy or girl, who have chronic disease of any type, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, any of it, doesn't matter, get counseling. I think when you are trying to, psychologically, we are discovering sense of self, who we are from like 14, 15, 16 to like 28, 29, 30. That is who you are framing who you are. And if you
Does it go later? Because I'm in my 30s.
Look, never grow up. That's my attitude. Peter Pan, right? So I think if you're having to process that normally as a teenager, that's hard. Nobody likes being a teenager. But when you throw chronic disease into that, it makes it a little bit more fraught, right?
Yeah, totally.
I think the challenge with, and this really, really, really just, it chaps my hide. This is like, it's going to make me mad even now talking about it. Like, when you meet a diabetic or an asthmatic or a cystic fibrosis patient or any other disease, there is never the onus on them on like a first date or like when they're a coworker or just like at Sunday school or just where you're going to meet them the first time for them to say, hi, I'm Fred, I'm diabetic, right? There's never a person for you to say, hi, I'm Becky and my thyroid's shot, right? Nobody's expected to do those things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like do that later with like rosé down the road, right? And so a lot of that stuff is like fifth or sixth or seventh date conversations sometimes. Once you've established whether or not you think, are you even remotely interested in them? Because you don't want to waste time on that conversation until they can handle it. But then when there's like this expectation with epilepsy, it's almost like I've got Voldemort's head on the back of my skull, and I have to tell you before I take the turban off, right? Like I have to say, I'm Brad, and I'm epileptic as like this like secondary introduction. And so I think that is a problem in the way we even define ourselves to some degree. That it is, you should not. One of my the first epileptologist I ever had told me, you are letting this disease have you. You have it, and that's fine. It is a disease you will have for the rest of your life, and you need to be smart about how you cope with that. But you are letting it have you. You are Brad Ingram. That mouth's going to get you in trouble for the rest of your life. You've got freckles, and there's all these things about you, but you are not defined by this disorder. It is like part 7B of what you are. And I think that's one of the challenges with this disorder is that when you're a teen, I'm answering your question, I promise. Eventually I'll get there.
Yeah. I don't even remember the question.
I think
I'm just listening. I hang in every word.
I think the challenge is they all need to be in counseling because they have chronic disease, period. But then one of the things that and especially our boys, as they're growing up, because, men get diagnosed with this later in life. They do. But in the panelists, we had a teenage boy who was young to it, me, who was a teenager and then was several years in, 20 plus years in, and then Jonathan, who had been diagnosed in his like mid 30s. So he had his whole life, job, spouse, everything figured out before he got epilepsy. And the way we experienced that disease were so different because he and I were about the same age, but we were different people. I grew up molding my life around it. He grew up without it and then figured out how to mold it around his life. I think the challenge there is for our young men, we have to help them see there are things you cannot do. You will never be a fighter pilot. Top Gun Maverick is not for you. We're not going to be doing that. But here's the thing. You're 6'4" and you weigh 270. You were never going to fit in the fighter pilot plane in the first place, right? So instead,
where is the 6'4", 270 fighter pilot? Is he an adult? What are we
Y'all need to
talking about?
get on down to Mississippi. They're down here farming sweet potatoes and cutting down trees.
Where
They're
I need
ready
to
to go.
go. Okay.
Yeah. Well, next time we'll do an in-person podcast.
Yeah, I'm coming
with
to
you,
visit.
and you can
That's
take
right.
us on a
But
tour of eligible
they
bachelors.
they need help sometimes seeing that, like, I think when you're newly diagnosed, you frame your whole world. And I think that because men sometimes then let the whole world, everything else collapse around the diagnosis. And that's why I said at the beginning, sometimes the only emotion they can touch with that is anger. And sometimes that anger is a very self-destructive, directed at self. They don't know who to be angry at. They can't be angry at their mom. They can't be angry at God. They can't be angry at their girlfriend. They can't be angry at who they're going to be angry at their cortex. Who knows what the cortex is, right? So they're angry at themselves, and they enter into these really self-destructive behaviors. So we have to almost work coping mechanisms into the early part of the diagnosis of, like, this is not take your Keppra and move on with your life. Coping with this diagnosis is like learning how to take your meds from the very beginning. And I wish that more of my colleagues, we are so good at talking about, we should screen all of our patients for suicide. We should screen them all. And we should. We absolutely should. The suicide risk is there. And we should absolutely talk to them about depression. We should. We absolutely should. But no one's out there saying, you know what, we really need to sit them all down and say, you need to talk to somebody weekly at the end of original diagnosis about how to cope with you as a person, especially these dudes are looking at this as all of my hopes and dreams are gone. So what am I going to do about that? My first doctor told me I would never live independently. I would never drive a car. I would never have a spouse. I would live with my parents for the rest of my life, that I needed to drop out of school, that I would never be able to go to college, like all of these things. So what am I supposed to replace that with?
Right.
Now, that you hear that now and go, what in the world? My parents sold their house and bought a house with a room over the garage because he was my doctor. And that's what you do when your doctor says something, right?
And you have good parents.
Yeah.
That's very, I mean,
And now
that is
they're the
very
best.
sweet.
They're the sweetest. They're not as likely to give me bail money as my wife is. They believe in teaching me lessons, but they're very sweet people. But the point of that is like there's this death of the future you thought you were going to have.
Totally.
And it is foolish for us to just say, you can do anything, right? You can do it all. No, you can't. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything.
Yeah.
And instead of just sitting on the couch and being angry and thinking about everything that you've lost and everything that's died, let's work to think about what you're going to do instead. Let's channel all of that energy into, like, if you're a real physically fit person and you can't drive to the gym anymore because it's 30 minutes, then, like, Freckles, we're going to have a bake sale and get you a Bowflex, right? Like, you need something. Guys need something to, like, put that energy into that's more healthy than just sit around the house and think about all their hopes and dreams that have been dashed on the rocks of this disease.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's a great, I like how you said, we're going to have a bake sale. And we're going to get you that Bowflex. It's kind of about problem solving. And I feel like when it's reframed like that for man or woman, when you just say, we're going to reframe this and say, what can we do to replace that thing? Now, but for you, okay, so you were told you're going to drop out of high school. You're not going to college. You can live with your parents. I'm assuming you don't live with your parents right now because...
No, my mother would have put me on the curb actively seizing a long time ago. No.
So how did you get to, I'm assuming you went to college and med school because you are a practicing doctor. So how did that come about? How did you become, and what was your journey? Why did you become an epileptologist? Oh my God, I'm on a roll.
So I went to college really is an act of rebellion. Isn't that funny when college is an act of rebellion? Hilarious.
They were like, maybe you should do a community college. I was like, nope, I'm going to a big school.
No.
Screw that.
I had a dear roommate who was like, he can seize in the dorm room. I don't care. He was,
yep.
What's the worst could happen? He probably regretted that decision. I had a really problematic freshman year, and I would love to say it was because I was up to more fun things. But I really just, I was one of those people who started seizing at 15, 15, 16, 17, 18, where my I'm going to burn my brain to pieces years. I mean, I just seized and seized and seized and seized and seized. And I got airlifted to Memphis I went to school at Ole Miss, hotty toddy. I love it. And now I have a high school senior and she's about to go back, and y'all, she's my only girl. And when she leaves, she loves me more than anybody. She's my best friend. And when she leaves, she's going to kill me. But when I got airlifted to Memphis twice, that's when I met that epileptologist who really kind of walked me through my diagnosis. It's so funny. The first time I met her, she said, "What kind of epilepsy do you have?" And my honest response, "I have the kind where you seize." Are there types? Are there I don't know. Are there multiple kinds?
I think that, we laugh about that, but I think that's still I think that's still
Oh
very
yeah.
true.
Plus it changes over time. Different doctors would change their minds on what kind of types I had. And I'm like, I can't keep track. Just look at my chart.
It's very common for people to come to me and have just not the first clue what's in their chart, and I think that's a really criminal. I think that is one of the other challenges of this disorder in general is, I tell people all the time, this is not hypertension we're taking care of. You don't just put somebody on hypertension medicine and their blood pressure goes down. I had a grandmother one time tell me that what I did was closer to witchcraft than science, because you just throw stuff in a pot and stir it up and see what pops out. And I think that is very accurate. Every patient is very different. We are all our own cauldrons, and people are just stirring stuff up in us and seeing what pops out. And I think that's perfect. Anyway, so I went to Memphis the second time and met an epileptologist there, and she kind of stirred up my cauldron with some different medications and showed me my EEG, showed me my MRI. And at the time, I was not going to go to medical school. I didn't think, I probably couldn't have survived it as bad as I was then. But I've been essentially seizure free since that visit with her that day. She just changed my meds and she gave me my whole life back.
That's
and
amazing.
Not just epilepsy wise, but with that concept of you have got to stop letting this disease have you. And I remember somebody wrote an editorial in the student newspaper on campus about oil prices or gas prices causing someone to have an epileptic fit. And I wrote this very angry missive letter to the editor about mocking seizure patients because I was so upset about it, right? Because I was that level of not that letter shouldn't have been written, but
Right.
I did not come from a healthy place is my point, right? Because I just that's all I was. I was a full-time epileptic, period. That's all I did, right?
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Right. She freed me from the diagnosis so much and from all that anger. I just cannot tell you how, and I think that's the challenge that day in the room with all those men. There was so much, not everyone had it anymore, but all of our stories had so much anger. And I think that may be one of the untapped things is we don't know what to do with it. And I don't know that necessarily a lot of our female colleagues, I'm sure there are angry women with epilepsy out there for sure. I'm not trying to.
Been there.
I'm sure I was angry. I just don't remember. At this point, I don't remember.
It ebbed and flowed in my teens and early 20s. It's died down now. But man, there were days when, I would just call my parents and just be, why can't I just keep up with everyone? Why can't I just go to class, come home, do my homework, keep up, go out, party a little bit, and not have a seizure? And there were definitely moments of anger, but I see it a lot more, as you point out, in men.
It's just a silent anger, And I think that the key there is I wasn't touching anything else. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't.
I wish that everyone who got diagnosed would just, they'd immediately have to go get a counselor or a therapist.
When it was all over, I sat my parents down when I was about 23 and apologized to them. Because who do you take it out on? Your parent, especially that mother. Ooh.
Oh, I've apologized to her so many times.
Right? Because who else? If you can't be mad at anybody, you can be mad at your mom, right?
Yeah, that poor thing.
And so I really was mostly kind of, just apologized to them and said, I really did not realize I had all of this. It was like a Mobius strip of emotion just swirling back on itself over and over and over again. And I didn't know what it was or what. And it was just, I was a very unhealthy person because I didn't know what to do with this energy and this emotion and this just, and, it touched me certainly in my psychological health. It touched me in my cognitive health. It definitely touched me in my spiritual health. I mean, I'm a very faithful spiritual person, and just, it wasn't that I lost that, but like in that anger, just like very much just did not go into atheism, but was like, I know you're there. I just don't care about you anymore. If you won't care about me, I won't care about you. Right. So like there was no part of me, and then certainly I wasn't physically healthy. So there was like no quadrant of me that was remotely in a healthy place.
And was it once you saw this new doctor, that's what made the switch once your seizures became controlled? Or what was it that kind of
I think a lot of it was her saying, you've got to stop thinking of yourself as like an epileptic. Like you've like having that honest conversation with me of like, this is a disease and it kind of sucks, right? Like it does as a disease goes, but you got to stop like fixating on this is who I am as a person. Like you can spend the next 70 years just sitting on your couch watching The Price is Right, wondering when your next seizure is going to be. But like, and that's fine. That may be what your existence is going to be, but it doesn't have to be that. And you're going to be a very angry, lonely person if you live within the boundaries of that is my existence. And unfortunately, I think that's the reality of some patients because they see so frequently. It's like, I just cannot,
Oh, I see it all the time. I definitely did that too. Especially with med changes, you just kind of go through the loop every, other week or how often you're doing it. And it's just like, what is even the point of getting up and showering? And, you definitely go in those dark places for sure. Yeah.
Right. But for me, see, it wasn't, and I had been so sick for so long at that time that I think there was maybe a hopelessness that it would ever be any different.
Oh yeah.
And
I'm like, I feel that. I think every seizure that I have, I'm like, it's that hopelessness just like comes just like crashing in, and it takes a few days, for it to go away. Lexi knows, just like, I see her in those hopelessness days.
We've all been there. Yeah.
But I think that's a huge part of it. Is just being like, well, it's kind of like for me anyway, every seizure I have is like a reacceptance of this condition, because those moments, those weeks that I'm seizure free, I'm just like, loving life and trying really hard, like you said, to not define myself like that, but still live, not kind of somewhere between sitting on the couch with Price is Right.
Yeah.
And also, going out and having fun with my friends, but then like the seizure happens and it's like, oh, right, I have this thing, it's kind of like the continual reacceptance of your limitations. And I think I like how you're just saying, like, rather than focusing on the limitations, focus on the things you can do. Right. Because and you're like, it's like accepting both those things at the same time. Like there's limitations, this thing sucks. However, there are still things you can do, and let's focus on those,
Right. And that's different for every person.
Totally.
Yeah, it's different. I will say it's funny. I got my epilepsy. Thankfully, we figured out what medication I needed. And so my seizures have been very well controlled. And then about 2 years ago, I started having these really significant migraines, like not a bad headache. Like I go blind, can't use half of my body, one half of my time, I can't talk. And so I told my wife, I was like, I got the seizures, but then here come I cannot win with this brain of mine. It's just, so it's kind of funny because it hurts more than a seizure, but I can't talk and I can't move. So it's kind of like, this is like a seizure I have to be awake for. This is even worse.
Yeah. Oh, God.
This brain of mine, can I please just, so it's almost like I've started over
with another cauldron.
It's always something.
I know, with another cauldron. And I've just started upping my seizure medicine more and more and more and more. Because it works for migraines too. And so now I'm like, I'm getting new side effects from this same medicine that I've been on. And it's not even, so
I did Botox. And it worked like a charm.
I should get Botox. That's the take home message from this.
It's really just for the free Botox.
It is. I when they first told me that, I was like, absolutely not. And I know, I just from the get-go was not someone who was looking for Botox. And I started about a year ago, and it was a side effect from, a new med. And it was just, this is the med that's working for me. And I was like, I'll do anything to stay on it. I had some super sweet nurse, and she was like, well, since you've already been on like every seizure medication in the book, we can just say that you've tried it for migraines. And then,
I like her.
Yeah. And then put it in and see if you get approved for Botox. And they went through, and honestly, obviously minor side effects from that too, but I used to be having to take stuff multiple times a day for it. I'd be on the ground from it, and it is life-changing. I get all the ones that are like up the back, neck,
you
skull.
heard it here first. Botox for all. That's the answer.
Please. I will be your promoter. And I was like, oh, this isn't a medication, because I was like, absolutely not. I'm not trying another medication. I'm not rocking the boat. They talked about, other things, and I'm like, no, give me your easiest thing to try. And they're like, we can just, shoot some stuff in your face. I'm like, perfect. Sign me up. I don't care. And
well, thankfully, I think I haven't had one in probably about 3 or 4 months now. So I think
awesome.
I've got it figured out. It is just knock on wood, or the next storm, whichever. But it is fascinating to me how this brain of mine. I was seeing a patient yesterday, and she was in tears because she's having the same type of headache, migraine headache. I said, since I saw you last, I've had about 4 of those where I can't walk and I can't talk, and one half of my tongue goes numb and I can't see, and they really do knock me down for about 2 days. And I said, I have so much more sympathy towards you than I did when I saw you 6 months ago.
And that meant the world to her.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she immediately stopped crying, and she was like, see, I told you. See? So
that is something I wanted to ask you about, because you see patients who have the same umbrella condition of epilepsy that you do. What difference do you feel like that makes in their treatment? It seems like a part of like the magic that goes in the cauldron to have a doctor that also has epilepsy, because it's like, no, I get it. Like, do you have those moments with your patients?
For one thing, I've been on tons of medications. I've had almost every side effect you can imagine. I've been on a wide spectrum of medications over the years. I've been very confused on my medicines. I've been super drowsy. I've lost 40 pounds. I've gained 40 pounds. I've had the whole spectrum. So I do think it's kind of funny when I'm starting a medication on somebody, and I can be like, now listen, in 2007, so that has been to some degree pretty helpful. I think, so it's twofold. I think for me, it's very helpful because, one of the nature of the epilepsy is you're not there for the seizure. I mean, you can be for some of the partial seizures, but like for my seizures, I'm not there. For a lot of my patient seizures, they're not there. They wake up and it's over. Everyone in their family saw it, or maybe everyone in Kroger saw it, right? Like, but they weren't there. So it's more for me about like stepping into the emotion of it all, because I remember all of that.
Sure.
And I remember when you're 15 and you have one at school, and how absolutely catastrophically devastating that is. And then I think the older I've gotten, the more perspective matters. One of the things I said in the men's group is, if you are with someone in a romantic relationship and they dump you because you have a seizure on a date, they were not for you. Like, that kind of person is going to be a nightmare to date for any number of reasons. Certainly, it's not someone you want to grow old with. If they can't handle a seizure, there's all kinds of other stuff they're not worth hanging around with. So in a certain degree, that perspective helps a little bit of like, your person is out there. You just got to plumb the depths a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
And be a little bit more nuanced about how you do that. But then the other thing that's kind of interesting is, I think for the families, it's very, very interesting. I remember more my parents' experience, the look in their eyes, waking up and seeing them at the foot of my stretcher, especially my mom, the look in her eyes. The first seizure I had was a 30-minute long seizure at school. And when I woke up, my first memory was looking out the back of the ambulance and seeing her eyes in the car behind us, out the windows of the ambulance, And the look, she was a nurse. She was the school nurse. So she was at school and saw the whole thing. And of course, I don't remember any of it, right? And so when I came to, and I have no idea what's going on, and the look on her face was just abject horror, right? And she's never really told me what she saw or did or experienced that day. And then every seizure subsequently, I would wake up and she would be there. She and Dad would be there. How many times have I gone to a bedside and a mom's been, and I've seen that same look on in a mom's eyes. So there's some of that that's like I'm experiencing it almost third person through the kid, through the mom's eyes, which is very weird and very meta and very Edgar Allan Poe. I get it. But it is a way for me to kind of really understand this disease process in a very personal way, even though I don't really remember my seizures. But I think a lot of parents too, just meeting a doctor who has epilepsy means that their kid, again, that like death knell that you seem to get when you get this diagnosis, it takes the sting out of that a little bit. And if there's even an ounce of hope of like, he went to medical school and he sees all the way through one of his anatomy practicals, which is a true story, by the way. Wow. And I made a big old F on it, right? Turns out you can't seize and take a test at the same time and make a good grade. I don't know if y'all knew that.
Yep, tried that. Nope.
Especially a write-in test. Yeah, I think it gives them a lot of hope. And that's been that's been a real, so sometimes I'll actually go meet patients that I'm not even taking care of if my nurse practitioner knows a family, especially of a teen with a new diagnosis, just as a like, they just need someone to come take the sting out of the diagnosis a little bit and be like, you can absolutely do this. You're going to be on medicine for the foreseeable future, probably the rest of your life, but you can do this. We just have to think about, and also counseling. You need to be in counseling right now. Yes. Go get counseling right now.
I think everyone that's so important though. Agreed. That's like a criteria to go out with a guy. Like, are you in therapy? Yes. But I just feel like that's a real important thing is for people with epilepsy to see other people with epilepsy doing things. No matter what it is, just doing something. So I was diagnosed at 32 and it wasn't until years later where I was like, I just want to meet another professional with epilepsy. And I probably had and just didn't know it because so many of us don't talk about it and we don't put it out there. And but then someone introduced me, to someone else and I just cried the first time I met another person because I was like, oh my God, you're out there. And that's what you're doing for your patients is like, look, we're out here. We might, you can't see it, but we're here. But I wanted to go back to just a few things you said about, like not letting epilepsy define you, and it doesn't have to be a first date conversation, but also like if someone freaks out and you have a seizure, they're not that person for you. Lexi and I talk about this a lot about, like when do you tell, for us, it's like, when do you tell, I've got epilepsy? Now, doing this podcast definitely helps because it's like, well, what do you do for work? And it's like, a podcast about epilepsy, and that breaks the ice
exactly.
Right there.
I usually just do it right away. I'm like, I usually, and before even I had the podcast or any sort of job, that's how I would, they'd kind of be like, well, why are you unemployed? Oh, I have epilepsy. I just sneak it in there, and I'd be like, if I saw that look on their face of shock or like. It freaked him out. I was like, you know what? If you don't want it, there's the door. But if you want to stay, let's see.
I wish I did that.
That's right.
No, I didn't do that. Definitely at first. I like hid it. I tried to hide it and be like, I'll make them fall in love with me. And then I'll tell them. And that did not work. Because it was like, why are we only hanging out during the day? And I was like, because I can't stay up past 8. So,
I don't think I've ever tried it.
Everything. And then I tried using it as like a test. It was like, oh, if they can handle my epilepsy, then I must date them because they're a saint. This person is amazing. And it's like, no, just because they accept this thing doesn't mean they're, necessarily the person for you. But I'm just so curious what it's like from a guy's point of view, from speaking from, on behalf of all men, obviously, but just from, a heterosexual male's point of view, like, is there an obligation to tell that person? Whether it's to yourself or to that person, should you have a seizure on the date, which I've also done, many times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of like, I feel like it's a moral dilemma that weighs over me for every guy I talk to, you know?
I mean, I think for one thing, there's no one answer to this. You know, like I think we've got 3 people on this call that are obviously dealing with it in 3 different ways, you know, like that. And that's okay.
You're so amazing. I'm sorry. We have to pause. We've got 3 people on this call who are dealing with it in 3 different ways.
I know.
Like, just
I
thank
love
you
that.
for, even though we have these similarities and we've talked through them, but we also have like different coping mechanisms, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
That's our Oprah moment right now. That's
And
our
we should
aha
recognize that, like, epilepsy gets this, like, oh, well, you have epilepsy. And so epilepsy is a wastebasket diagnosis, meaning it doesn't mean anything. When you get that diagnosis, that's the like starting point of your diagnosis, not the end point. I could get 100 different people with seizures in a room and get 100 different diagnoses of why they're seizing. So it is folly for us to assume that any question we ask those 100 people are going to answer it the same way. But when you talk about things like dating and relationships and what are we bringing to the table, then those things by their very nature are going to be super personal and really very reflective of what other, I keep wanting to use the word baggage, but I don't want to use that term. What's a nice word for baggage? What other personal development have we brought to the table, right?
I'm stealing that one. Well, my personal development resume consists of...
That's right. It not be like a defining factor in who you are. That's all I was saying. Because it's not. It may be on page 2 of your resume because you may have seize on the day, right? But it's not who we are as beings. We were not beings who were made or created or whatever you believe happened to be disease. That is not who you are, right? And so instead of saying, and I might at any minute have a seizure and my face might go in this pea soup, right? We say, you know, one of the interesting things about me and the journey that I've been on is that I started having seizures when I was 15, and then we gauge their response. And then you say, and here's like 5 or 6 things that I have learned from that as a person. And here's some of the really interesting things about me that really set me apart compared to some of the other hoochies that you've dated in the past. And here's something that really makes me a keeper. Also, unlimited access to benzos.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then maybe just slap some rectal diazepam on the table and let's see where the night takes us, right? God. I mean, so I think it's all in the kind of delivery
dating coach,
of
Dr. Ingram.
Yes. I love it.
I think it's what you bring to the table to a certain degree. But whenever you're going to talk about it, it's one of those things where you don't just say, hey, by the way, here's my seizure medicines, get ready to jam it up my nose after the appetizers, right? We need to also be able to say, here's where I'm at and here's what I'm learning and this is what it's about. And because people are not attracted to broken sparrows with broken wings. They are attracted to
the wrong
eagles
people are. The wrong.
True.
There are people out there, but you know what they want to do? They want to put you in a cage, right?
Yes.
They are attracted to eagles who are soaring, right? Eagles can have absolutely, a missing foot, right? You don't have to have 2 feet to soar. You can soar and not be perfect, but you gotta represent yourself as someone that's, I think, learning from it and developing and growing, because ultimately, especially if you're getting to an age where you're wanting more than a hookup and you're wanting to date for marriage, that's what they want your disease to be. They are marrying you as a person who's going to have that be a part of who they are, and they want it to be something that you're going to do something with, not just the monster under the bed that's going to chase you for the next 30 years and chase them for the next 30 years.
Yeah, and what's so interesting and what I've loved about this conversation, Brad, is that so much has been about changing perspective, and what you do have control over and how you present things, rather than saying, I have epilepsy and I'm really embarrassed. I don't want to talk about it. It's just like, so this is this thing that I have, and this is what I've learned from it, and this is how I've grown, that, and also like rather than focusing on limitations, focusing on what you can do. Like there's just so much of this. I love your, idea, and I'm putting an ideology on you right now, but it just seems to be of shifting perspective, and which is the thing we have control over is perspective, and not that we and you're not saying to disregard all the shitty stuff. Not that, but just take that in, but then focus on being a one-legged eagle, and that's
right. That's right.
But, okay. But before we wrap up, I do have to ask how you and your wife met and how dating went and how she became your parole officer.
That's right. We met I did say that on our first date. You are signing to my parole officer. I think she knew that before she dated me, actually. That was just intrinsic on the first meeting. We met at college. She had transferred in, so she was a transfer student, and I was a senior and she was a junior. And we had both kind of just come off relationships. And the funny thing is, we were best friends. I actually asked her out, and she said, I can't do that when I asked her, which is such a weird way to answer, right? Well, I only ask once. So if you say I can't do that, you're not going to do that. So I said, fine, that's fine. Well, I did not know I was asking her in front of a guy she was currently on a date with.
Oh, God.
And she didn't, she panicked. Like, what are you supposed to say? Right. And so I didn't ask her. So then but she would eat dinner. She would come over to my house every Sunday night and we would watch TV. We would cook pasta together and then chase each other around with like rolled up dishcloths. And then,
oh my God, it's like the 50s or something. That's adorable.
I know. It's like, Sleepless and You've Got Mail or something. But, and then I graduated. And then the last night I graduated, I went to her house and we stayed up till the sun came up. And my car was all packed, like I was going home. And I couldn't bear myself to leave the town because that was going to be the last time. And so my apartment was all moved out, but I couldn't come home. So then the sun came up. So I went home. And then this was back when we didn't really have cell phones. And I would call her mom's house every day. And her mom had one of those kitchen phones with a really long cord.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm dating myself. And I called her 3 times a day. We would talk for like 3 hours. And then I went to work for a camp. And so I didn't have any access to a phone. And she's a writer. She's a great writer. And she would write me letters every day. And I fell in love with her written word first. And that's how I kept them all. I have all of them. And then she came to my house that I bought in Jackson to start medical school. And I sat her down and I was like, I can't be calling you 3 times a day. You can't be writing me letters if we're like, what is this? Like, I don't understand. I know very clearly how I feel about you. I asked you out in September. It is now June. What are we doing? Mm-hmm. And I've watched you date half of the student body, which I say, and she always rolls her eyes at me because it's not true, but it's how it felt, right? Uh-huh. And she was like, oh, I said no. I said I couldn't because I was on a date with that other guy. You could have asked me like 20 minutes later, and I would have said yes. I was like, well, what? You got to follow up, babe. You got to follow up. Oh. And so that night I guess that was the DTR, right? That was
yes.
And so we dated through medical school and then got married towards the end of my medical school career. And then next summer will be 20 years.
Wow.
So we've been married a really long time. And she's a very impressive human being that I'm very lucky to get to spend my life with. So we've got 3 kids together and she keeps me out of jail as much as possible. So anyway, so she was my best friend before we dated. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of this stuff wasn't fraught for our relationship is it's easy to talk about your epilepsy with your best friend. Mm-hmm. And so by the time we were dating, it was a non-issue. It was just part of who I was. And she didn't care. It was just she already knew the whole being of me long before we were official.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have not had a lot of seizures since that time. But then, when I have, she has always been very chill about it. It's just been kind of part of who I am.
Well, I think we need to end with that beautiful, adorable love story. especially
she
today.
would roll her eyes and go, "Don't talk about this. Nobody cares about this. Why are you talking about this?"
I think your face sums it up while you told that story. That was cute to watch, just that.
She's the best.
Well, Brett, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so awesome. It's like a shot of serotonin chatting with you.
Is.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you, ladies. I really appreciate it.
Hey, guys. So our epilepsy fave this week is called the Hidden Truths Project. It is a beautiful nonprofit that supports and promotes artists with epilepsy. This nonprofit also raised over $500,000 for epilepsy research. And every artist featured is telling their story in ways that words cannot capture. They did have an event in Chicago this past fall, but I, of course, had a seizure that day and missed it. But a friend was very kind to send me pictures, and it looked absolutely amazing. Please check out the Hidden Truths Project. They're featured on our website under Our Faves at whatthefpodcast.com. As always, our faves do not pay to be on here. We just want to promote people with epilepsy doing awesome stuff. So if that resonates with you or you know someone, please reach out to us on our contact form on our website. Okay, talk to you next week.